Got a couple announcements before we turn it over to David. And the first one, let's see, where'd that go? I've got a very special announcement to make, and I'm hoping they're both on the call. But let's see, our past presidents met this week to determine the Career Award and the Civic Award. And I'm pleased to announce that Karen Burns is our Career Award winner this year. And our Civic Award winner is Rob Schlegel. So we will present their awards when we can meet in person again, whenever that is. And so I want to congratulate both Karen and Rob, and perhaps we can give them a virtual round of applause here on the call. So a few other announcements here. We've got some great speakers coming up. As we were talking about earlier, the Zoom allows us to get some nationally known speakers and perhaps some speakers we wouldn't normally get. August 13th, we've got historian Dan Miller, my good friend, and I believe David's as well, Ted Green, will be on the call to make a major announcement about the film and his work with Eva Kor. A former professor of mine, Dr. Mark Leary, great psychology professor, will be talking about intellectual humility, which I think some of us need right now in this country. And Matt Painter, the Purdue basketball coach, will speak on September 3rd. Somebody asked me about his counterpart in IU, and all I can tell you is we're waiting to hear back. So keep your fingers crossed there. September 10th, we've got a really important panel discussion on race. Got a really great panel, and we announced this in the newsletter this week, and we'll continue to, but we're going to base the discussion on your questions. So we want you to submit questions to Taylor in advance, but we really want to drive that discussion, and we'll send those questions to the panelists in advance based on your feedback. And then Steve Lavin. Steve Lavin is the former UCLA basketball coach. He actually worked under Gene Cady as an assistant at Purdue, so he's got some Hoosier roots, and is now a Fox Sports analyst. He'll talk about COVID's impact on college basketball and talk about the Big East, which is moving into, hard to believe, I believe its 7th year as a new iteration, and certainly talk about the Butler Bulldogs. Reminder too that all of our external community grant applications are due in less than a month. They're due by September 1st. We postponed all of our member dues through October 1st. And again, all in-person meetings are canceled through at least the end of my presidency, which is October 1. We took a lot of thought and care into that decision and weighed a lot of statistical evidence based on the CDC and the state of Indiana. So I hate that we can't meet in person, and we'll see, turn that over to Eric, and I know he'll also give thoughtful consideration of what we plan to do here. We also have just crossed $96,000 raised toward our $105,000 campaign goal. I've threatened to stay on as president until we hit that goal. So if that doesn't motivate you, I don't know what will. But we've got less than $10,000 to get there. We've raised 92% of our goal, and anything you can do to help us is much appreciated. If we have any guests in attendance, we'd love to hear from you if you're joining us from near or far. So if you've got a minute, please take time to introduce yourself.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Tom. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tom Hoover. I'm from the Wawasee Club. It was my understanding there were supposed to be 3 other members here, but I don't see anybody else at this point in time.
I'm here, Tom. I'm Michelle.
Oh, there you are.
Hi.
Okay.
I'm the president of Indy Kiwanis.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sitting in my classroom. We're getting ready to start the school year, both virtually and in person. So I'm getting my room ready to start next Friday, actually, with students.
We're glad to be here.
Hello. We're glad to have you. Any other
Hi.
guests?
I am Pam Kiwani, Pam from Kiwanis Club of New Kingston. We are celebrating our Independence Day today. Because of the lockdown, we can't do much, so we have decided to attend the meeting. And my understanding is that some other members should be joining us shortly. Thank you.
We do have Pam. We have Director Judith, DLG Girthlin, Kiwanian, Janet, and I'm DP Sandro, and I think DS Sonia is also online.
That's wonderful. We've really enjoyed the presence of our Jamaican counterparts on this call. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. At this time, it is a great honor to turn it over to my friend. I believe he's my good friend. I hope that is likewise on the other end. But David Woods is just a tremendous sports writer. I'm not going to read his entire bio because I really want him to focus on his new book. But a couple things. David is a University of Illinois graduate. He has a long history in sports writing, perhaps best known for covering the Butler Bulldogs, but he's covered, as you will hear, the Olympics, track and field, just a lengthy tenure with the Indianapolis Star. He's written several books, and I have to tell you, this is a very true story. I told David the story. In 2012, I was working for the University of Louisville in development, and I was on a plane, and I remember where I was going, to Washington, D.C., and I had just purchased a copy of his book, Underdogs, and I just thought it was an unbelievable story. I knew, of course, about Butler's Final Four runs, but David did a phenomenal job capturing the behind-the-scenes elements of that story, and I was just flabbergasted. I'm like, this would be an unbelievable place to work. And a couple months later, everybody in my house was asleep. I went on the Butler website and saw a job and advancement, and unbeknownst to my wife, put my resume in, and I'm getting ready to start my 9th year. And so I really, by the way, the people at Butler hate you, David, but I've had a great run. I'm getting ready to start my 9th year. And so I credit David's book with me getting to Butler. But he's a great friend. He's just a great writer, and he's here today to talk about his new book, Indiana University Olympians. David, we're honored to have you, and it's all yours.
Well, thanks, Graham. I'm very humbled by that introduction. Yes, Butler basketball definitely is an unbelievable story, and that segues into really what oddly, Butler basketball and the Olympic Games are a fit for me, because what I love most about journalism is storytelling, and just as the Butler Bulldogs have been fertile ground for storytelling, so have the stories of Olympians. And I was asked by Indiana University Press to write a book about their Olympians, and they asked me to write about 20 or 25. So of course I wrote about 49 Olympians, and it was difficult. I had to stop somewhere, and it was difficult to make some of those decisions. Maybe a lot of people aren't aware, even in our own state, of Indiana's great legacy in the Olympic sports. I mean, our state is a basketball state. Of course, the Indiana Hoosiers have a wonderful, basketball tradition. They've actually had 4 Olympic gold medalists in basketball, most recently being Steve Alford in 1984, which was the last U.S. amateur team to win a gold medal, coached by Bob Knight and featuring Michael Jordan. Quinn Buckner and Scott May were on the 1976 Olympic gold medal team, and Walt Bellamy was on the 1960 team, which I maintain is the original dream team. That team also featured Indianapolis's Oscar Robertson, and Walt Bellamy was a center on that team. And as I was reviewing, you could make a good case that Walt Bellamy is the greatest player in Indiana IU basketball history. But I'm not here just to talk about basketball. Indiana has course, a fabulous tradition in swimming, thanks to the Doc Councilman era. And when I started doing some of my research, I realized that only 7 U.S. colleges have produced more Olympic gold medals for the United States than Indiana. And to me, that's pretty surprising, because Indiana really does not have the advantage of climate, and doesn't have the advantage of massive football revenue, which is all the schools above them have that. Here, the schools that over the decades have more Olympic gold medals than Indiana are Stanford, UCLA, Cal, USC, Texas, Michigan, and Florida. And other than Michigan, all those schools have the advantage of the warm climate. And of course, in Michigan, especially, won really most of its gold medals early in the 20th century. But they have the advantage of massive income. So it's been a part of our state's culture, and really of Indiana University's culture. In a way, it's almost inexplicable that Indiana would have done so well in Olympic sports over the years. Ranks 11th all time in medals with 95. It's had athletes from 24 foreign countries. I don't think they've had any Jamaican Olympians. I'm delighted, being a track and field enthusiast, to have some Jamaican guests here today. And the title of the book is Indiana University Olympians, from Leroy Samsey to Lily King. I imagine most of you are familiar with Lily King's story, the sort of provocative swimmer who defeated her Russian rival at Yulia Efimova to win the 100-meter breaststroke at the Rio Olympics. Graham and I were just talking about Rio before we went on. And then she also won a gold medal in the medley relay. And the Leroy Samsey feature there was Indiana's first Olympic medalist back in 1904 at the St. Louis Olympics. And his sort of interesting post-athletic career included performing in the circus. If you realize what a crazy event the pole vault is, you could kind of see why a pole vaulter might become a circus performer. The book I certainly wrote at great length about Mark Spitz, the greatest Olympian in IU history, and arguably one of the 3 or 4 greatest Olympians of all time. He was 7 for 7 in gold medals and world records at the 1972 Munich Olympics. I think his chapter is the longest in the book. Also want to highlight Milt Campbell, who is, oddly, one of probably the least heralded all-time greats in the history of this country. He was the first African-American gold medalist in the decathlon at the 1956 Olympics in Melbourne, Australia. He played pro football, but sort of for whatever reason, I don't know, it's because TV didn't really feature the Olympics as much then. The Olympics that year were held during basically the fall, so people were probably preoccupied with football. But he certainly is in the pantheon of great American athletes. He's the only athlete that I'm aware of who belongs to both the track and field and swimming halls of fame. I think another high school kid, when he was in high school in New Jersey, told him because he was black he couldn't swim, and then of course he went out and just beat everybody up in sprint races as a swimmer. He was borderline Olympic caliber in judo. Just Milt Campbell, and he was he was a tremendous football player for the Hoosiers as well, and tied a world record in the 120-yard high hurdles. So Milt Campbell's story is certainly in there, and one to know. And coincidentally, at that same Olympics in 1956, was Dr. Greg Bell. And Dr. Bell recently retired after a half century of being the director of dentistry at Logansport State Psychiatric Hospital here in Indiana. And his story is so amazing. It really does sound like it's fiction. I mean, it sounds like somebody made it up, except fiction has to be somewhat plausible for people to read it. And Greg Bell's story is really not plausible. He grew up on the outskirts of Terre Haute, rural Terre Haute, and his family's home burned down, and all they had left on the property was a chicken house. So he spent much of his youth being raised in a chicken house. Then his family had to leave there because a munitions depot was being built on their property during World War II. So they moved again. He went to high school in Terre Haute. His favorite event was the pole vault because he loved Tarzan, and that was like the closest thing he could come up with to swinging from a vine. But an injury knocked him out of the pole vault, and the coach there asked him and said, "Well, what do you think about the broad jump," which was the name, which was the long jump was called then. And he kind of looked at his coach and said, "What's that?" I mean, he just knew nothing about track and field at all. So, well, you run down this runway, you leap off this board and see how far you can go. And Greg said, "Well, I could probably do that." So he went down there and did it once, and it was longer than the school record. So he was a long jumper and finished second in the state in high school as a senior, and figured his track and field career was over. And then later, to get a better job, he joined the military, and was sort of on very short notice asked to participate in the all-military games. I believe it was in France, and he went there and did well, won some medals. I think had a trophy, brought the trophy back to Terre Haute. So fast forward a few more years, he's sick in bed. Family doctor comes over because they knew the family, and the doctor comes in and sees this trophy in the Bell's living room, and they said, "What's this?" And Greg Bell explained he won that when he was in the military, whatever. And the doctor, instead of showing much sympathy for his patient, said, "Well, you're just wasting your time. You got to get out of here and enroll at Indiana and go to college and get a college degree." And of course, Greg Bell thought this man was insane. And he was like 23 or 24. I mean, wasn't a track athlete. He wasn't really a scholar. So he ends up enrolling at Indiana, does very well there, wins a national indoor championship as a freshman when freshmen weren't eligible, and spends his birthday in Waikiki Beach in Hawaii on the way to Melbourne, Australia, and then becomes Olympic champion in the long jump at Melbourne, Australia. Really, I mean, this is like about as out of nowhere as you can imagine. I mean, no one ever heard of this guy. He ends up a couple of times came within about an inch of Jesse Owens' world record in the long jump, and really, I really feel like if you had a Mount Rushmore or a pantheon of athletes coming out of this state for achievement, and of course his achievements after his athletic career were amazing too, Greg Bell would have to be right up there on the Mount Rushmore with Oscar Robertson, and you can name whoever. You may want to put Larry Bird up there, but I would maintain that Greg Bell belongs up there as well. Almost with and in some respects, an even more out of nowhere story is that of Lesley Bush, who was a teenage diver coincidentally also in New Jersey, in Princeton, New Jersey. And on about 7 months before the Tokyo Olympics in 1964, no one had ever heard of her. I mean, school didn't really have a program. She dove a little bit. She trained some. Somehow she got linked up with Indiana diving coach Hobie Billingsley, and he coached her a little bit. He encouraged her. She was she made a lot of improvement, and then in the Olympic trials, she finished 4th in the 3-meter springboard, which three made the Olympic team. So she was really close. She almost made the team. And then came 10-meter platform, an event which she had either like not trained on at all or had just like a few times off that. And it's if you've ever been in the natatorium here in Indianapolis, it's fairly terrifying. I've been up there at the top of that tower. It's like 3 stories high. It's like 33 feet high. I'm not jumping off that tower, much less diving in there and doing twists and turns or whatever. So anyway, she participated in the Olympic trials in the platform diving, and then surprisingly finishes 3rd. And 3 per event made the team. So, you know, little Lesley Bush is on her way to Tokyo at age 16, and really seemingly more of a tourist going to Tokyo than a competitor. She was not the favorite. I mean, she wasn't even supposed to be there. But she, in the first round of the Olympic final, she's in the lead in the first round. She's in the lead every round. At the end of the day, she wins the gold medal, like by a little over a point. And Hobie Billingsley, the IU coach, rightfully calls it the biggest upset in the history of Olympic diving, which it had to be. And it was so astounding that when a journalist called Lesley's parents in New Jersey, and then because of the time change, it was in the middle of the night, the parents thought it was a crank call, were very offended that someone would try to pull a joke on them about their daughter in the middle of the night, and hung up the phone. Fortunately, Lesley herself called an hour later, and it was like, "Hey, Mom and Dad, I'm the Olympic gold medalist." So Lesley Bush later enrolled at IU and became a Big Ten champion diver there. She made it back to the Olympics in 1968, but did not duplicate her near miraculous victory from 1964. But I've got to think that in addition to maybe Billy Mills' Olympic gold in the 10,000 meters in track and field, also in Tokyo in 1964, that Lesley Bush's victory in platform diving in '64 has to be one of the great upsets in Olympic history in any sport. It was really out of the blue. It's and a lot of these athletes, I think their story. That's to say that's why I love covering Olympic sports. It's such fertile ground for storytelling, and a lot of as amazing as some of their achievements as athletes were, a lot of the stories that I chronicled, the athletes have very interesting post-Olympic careers. Mike Troy, who was from Indianapolis, won 2 gold medals in swimming, went on to win a Silver Star, fighting in the Vietnam War. Fred Schmidt, another swimmer, became a Navy SEAL and was in charge of the fishing the astronauts out of the water after the Apollo 14 and 15 space missions. So he's certainly got an interesting backstory. Cynthia Potter is a diver out of IU, was a bronze medalist. She sort of just by chance became a TV commentator for diving. I think she'd been commentator I believe at every Olympics diving since like 1992, and still is. In fact, you've probably heard Cynthia Potter's voice if you've watched Olympic diving ever and just not known it was her, made that connection that she was a Hoosier diver. One of the themes that I found recurring too, as great as some of these athletes were and as great as their achievements were, they could have even been greater. I think of Dee Dee Nathan, who was a heptathlete out of IU and made the Olympic team in 2000. Did not medal, but she very easily could have been a 4-time Olympian. She almost made the Olympic team in '92. I believe she was 4th in the trials. '96, she almost made the team. 2000, she finally did. And in 2004, she almost made the team. It kind of goes to show why this potentially could be a devastating outcome for so many athletes if we can't have an Olympics next year in Tokyo. Right now, actually, we should be having the 2020 Olympics, should be going on right now in Tokyo. I certainly pray that we're able to have the Olympics around this time next year. But I think almost 80% of Olympians just go to one. It's a very narrow window. You just get really, for most elite athletes, they get one Olympics, they get one shot, and that's it. So, and yet so many of these athletes could have gone to 2 and 3 and 4 Olympics, and yet sometimes only ended up going to one. Another one of my favorite stories about missing out on an Olympics is Roy Cochran. Now Roy Cochran looked like he was on the verge of making the 1940 Olympic team in track and field because he was having such a great 1939 season in the hurdles and in the 400-meter dash. And of course, the 1940 Olympics scheduled for Tokyo were canceled by World War II, as were the 1944 Olympics. So Roy Cochran, I mean, he's done. He's got no chance. And then started doing some postgraduate work at USC in Los Angeles in 1946, and was sort of astounded that he seemed to have all the speed that he had, before the war started. So he continued training, made the U.S. team when the Olympics resumed at London in 1948, and set an Olympic record in winning the gold medal in the 400-meter hurdles in 1948, and then also won a gold medal in the 4x400 relay, which was achieving the same gold medal that his older brother had won in 1924 out of Mississippi. And the only reason that Roy Cochran had ever gone to Indiana in the first place is because the IU coach, Billy Hayes, had also coached his brother at Mississippi before going to Indiana. So that was the connection. But I'm actually not aware of an athlete who was like on the verge of Olympic glory, missing 2 Olympics, and then finally making it, and then winning 2 gold medals. So Roy Cochran is definitely one of my favorite stories. One of my favorite stories in the book. And one more I'll mention before I throw it open to questions. Another swimmer who very well could have been a 4-time Olympian, and some people in Bloomington may know, is Chet Jastrzemski. He was a longtime physician in Bloomington, and he was sort of inexplicably left off a team one year, and then he made another year and swam in preliminaries of the relay. And now, if you swim in preliminaries of a relay and your team wins a medal, you get that medal. But he didn't. His distinction is he made the cover of Sports Illustrated in 1962, labeled the world's greatest swimmer. And anyone who knows about American sports culture, the number of swimmers who have made the Sports Illustrated cover is much smaller than the number of American swimmers who have won gold medals. So hats off to Chet Jastrzemski. He set a bushel full of breaststroke records. He probably should be more widely known. In fact, I must confess, when I'm going through all these IU Olympians, trying to figure whose story to include and how to make the cut, I come across Chet Jastrzemski, and I wasn't going to include him in the book. And so, well, what did he do? I looked him up, and I do it. Oh no, I have to put him in the book. His story is amazing, and as really so many of these Olympian stories is amazing. But Chet Jastrzemski was kind of, I don't know if snake-bit is the right word, but he very easily could have been in 4 Olympics. He only won medals in 1, but again, it underscores just how small the window is for these athletes to achieve Olympic glory. I'd be happy to entertain questions from anybody on any of the athletes I've mentioned, or any other questions pertaining to the Olympic Games and the Indiana Hoosiers.
And we have plenty of time for questions. David, if you don't mind, I'm going to lead off with a couple here and would enjoy your comments. I have not had the pleasure to read the book yet, but this probably won't surprise you, but these are basketball questions from me. Would Isaiah Thomas have made the team if the 1980 Olympics were not canceled? That's one question.
I think he might have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he might have made the team because that would have been another amateur team. A very strong chance he would have made it.
And then do you touch upon, I mean, the 1984 Olympic trials were fascinating with Alford making the team, and I think some speculation that he only made it because he played at IU, although he averaged in double figures during the Olympics. I think there's some humorous stories with Knight and Charles Barkley. Knight basically telling him he was overweight, wouldn't make the team, and Charles Barkley, I don't think ever forgot about that. And then I'd also heard Knight was really upset when the Russians pulled out of the 1984 games because he wanted to beat them badly. I think he later got a shot in Bloomington in '88 or '87 and got pulled off or got ejected from the game. But I'd love any comments on Alford in the '84 Olympics and the trials themselves.
Well, Alford was kind of surprised to even get invited to the trials, and he wrote his he's got an autobiography out. Even though I did interview him by phone, but he really had a lot of great insights in his autobiography, and he kept making the cut, and he had two huge advantages during those trials. One was that he knew Knight's system. He kind of knew what was desired. And the other thing, he was such a great shooter. And I think I do recall, that there was some criticism when he made the team, but he claimed that the panel unanimously wanted Alford on the team. And Knight's retort was, well, do I punish him because he's an IU player? And I believe he was the third leading scorer on the team. And I think it was either a quarterfinal or semifinal game against France, which is maybe in the only game that team was challenged the whole tournament. Alford was terrific, led the team in scoring, and Alford, recounts in his and I mentioned in the book too that Knight, who never does this, really praised Alford afterward and said, if it hadn't been for you, I think we would have lost. And so I think that meant a lot to Steve Alford, and it was arguably true. And then the funny thing about that is apparently Alford had a running gag with his sons then thereafter, saying, well, France just can't get over me. So anytime anything came up involving France, Steve Alford would kind of joke with his sons, well, France is still not over me yet because of the way I torched him at the 1984 Olympics. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah,
he ruined with Charles Barkley too, and that was like an unending source of humor.
Yeah, I also recall that Michael Jordan bet him $100 that he wouldn't last 4 years under Bob Knight, and Alford still laments that he's never been paid that $100. So
I think that's a true story.
So we've got some other questions here from my friend Gary Gardner. Asks, is Frank McKinney Jr. mentioned in your book?
Oh yeah, he's definitely in there. Yeah, he's definitely in the book.
And for the audience, David, can you talk a little bit about Mr. McKinney and his role there?
Well, he won a I think 1 or 2 Olympic medals. Was very kind of influential early in the councilman area, and of course became a very successful Indianapolis banker, and then died tragically in a plane crash. But Frank McKinney Jr. is sort of kind of among the foundational figures of the councilman era, and he's from Indianapolis, as is Mike Troy, and is he's a very key and foundational figure in the building of the councilman dynasty. Okay,
so we've got another question. actually two questions. How does Oscar Robertson stack up against today's leading players? And then does Doc Councilman get much credit for all the fine swimmers from IU?
Well, regarding Oscar Robertson, I really didn't see him playing. I've only watched him on film. I can't imagine that he would. I guess you could make an argument that he would be every bit as good, or perhaps even I don't know, better now. Think of all his all-around skills, as a rebounder, passer, shooter, and think of the way that the floor is spread now with the three-point line, and how effective he would be, getting close to the basket with the floor spread so well, and with his strength and ball skill. So I mean, he was Mr. Triple Double before that was a trendy statistic. And I don't know. If Oscar Robertson played now, I think he'd be I don't know, what would he be, one of the best 2 or 3 players in the NBA? I mean, I just can't imagine that he wouldn't thrive in that way. Regarding the Doc Councilman, boy, I sure hope so. And I hope I'm not exposing myself too much here, but even as I was growing up in Illinois and reading about Doc Councilman and what he did, and I have gotten a couple people to agree with me on this, and I would still maintain, I think I can make a pretty good argument, that Doc Councilman is the greatest coach in the history of this country in any sport, because of his worldwide influence on the sport, which by that criteria would essentially eliminate, for instance, all football coaches, all American football coaches, because it's not a worldwide sport. But the science he used, his psychological techniques. I mean, I just think the world of it. And I said about exposing myself. I have recently committed myself to writing a Doc Councilman biography. I don't have a publisher yet, but I'm pretty confident I'd find one. I was just sure one had been written. One has not been written. I've been in contact with the family, and it is my aim over these next few years to write the definitive Doc Councilman biography, because it needs to be written.
I do have a Butler question here. What is the status of Kamar Baldwin and Sean McDermott as far as the pros go? And any comments on the last shot of Kamar Baldwin's career?
Well, I guess you can't do much better than Ted Williams homering in his last at bat with the Boston Red Sox than Kamar Baldwin did hitting a 3-pointer at Xavier to beat your arch rival with your last act as a college player. I do think because of Baldwin, Butler was poised to make a decent run in the tournament. I think they could have got the Sweet 16. I think it's just Baldwin and McDermott just kind of have to wait and see what happens. That's why I was surprised. Jordan Tucker left. Everything is so indeterminate in the basketball world right now. You don't know what's going to happen with the G League. The NBA draft is still a ways off. When is the NBA going to start? Is there going to be a G League? Americans aren't even allowed in Europe now. You're going to play overseas. So as far as I know, Baldwin and McDermott are working out and just waiting to see when their next opportunities are. But I think both will certainly continue playing professionally after their college careers.
I had a question about Kevin Barry from Australia.
Yes. What about Kevin?
Well, he was an Olympic gold medal winner, I believe.
Yeah, he won medals for Australia, and then I guess he was like somewhat disappointed in his 76 Olympics, but then I guess part of his easing some of his disappointment was he caught the attention of Doc Councilman and ended up going to Indiana, and apparently did credit that college system for since he was racing against top swimmers all the time, and ended up winning medals again for at the 1980 Olympics. That so many Western nations boycotted.
We've got
Doc had several foreign Olympians, not like a whole bunch of them, but he coached several foreign Olympians to medals, and Kevin Barry was certainly probably foremost among those.
David, we do have a question from Girthland with our Jamaican contingent. What are your views on Jamaica's achievements in athletics? I think they had a bobsled team, didn't they, at one time in the Olympics? But what are your?
Of course, I never been to Jamaica. Of course, I love Jamaicans' legacy of.
You're missing a lot. When COVID goes, please visit us.
Yeah, well, I would love to visit Jamaica. What I really love to do is to see a track and field meet in Jamaica. I know a lot of people may not know Usain Bolt's first major international glory was at the World Junior Championships in Jamaica. I believe it was in 2002 when, as a 15-year-old, he won the World Junior title, and with a ridiculous time, and sort of heralded his presence on the world stage. And I'm also kind of probably partial to Jamaica too, because as an Illinois graduate, probably belonging on our Mount Rushmore of athletes is Herb McKinley, a Jamaican player who also was then was head of track and field in Jamaica for many years. Very revered figure, but not only made contributions as an athlete, but made contributions thereafter, and the U.S. Jamaica rivalry in the sprint corps is really one of the fun components of international track and field.
We've got a question here posed to me privately. Mark Spitz versus Michael Phelps in the pool. Who you got?
Depending on the event, that's interesting to mention. I recently, being the numbers, I don't know if I still have the figures, being the numbers nerd that I am, I went back and figured out the total margin of victory for Phelps's 5 individual wins in Beijing in 2008 against Spitz's 4 individual wins in Munich in 1972. And I thought I thought Spitz's total margin would exceed Phelps's, but actually it didn't. But of course, Phelps did win one relay gold medal because of a miraculous anchor leg by Jason Lezak, and he won the 100 butterfly on a lunge by a 100th of a second. And Spitz's closest race was by half a second, and none of the relay races were close. So I think you can make a case that Spitz's achievements were every bit as great in 72 as Phelps's were in 2008. And you could even make the case that he was more dominant than Phelps. 7 for 7, that's the other thing, it'd never been done before. Until something's been done, you don't know if it's doable. At least, Phelps kind of had a aim, and Spitz was 7 for 7, 7 gold medals, 7 world records. And I mean, you can't do any better than that. And was able to kind of, use his Olympic fame into some endorsements at a level that we'd never seen before.
Feel free to chime in if you've got additional questions, but David, I'm not going to let you off the hook easily. I've got a couple more for you. We are on the cusp of, college sports here with football starting up and basketball soon after. Do you have a prediction on what's going to take place here in the next couple of months?
Boy, anyone in the prediction business now should get out of it, because it's just hard. It's just impossible. I'm still not sure we're going to have college football at a level. I kind of think we'll have a college basketball season, even if it's has fits and starts, and we have some interruptions. And if we either start out with hardly any fans or with no fans, but as we've seen, with Major League Baseball, unless people are in a bubble, it's hard to keep the COVID-19 virus from spreading. So we'll see. I just don't have. I'm even worried about having next year's Olympic Games too, because the Tokyo organizers have said if we can't have them next year, we can't postpone them to 22. We'll just cancel them. So I certainly don't know. I certainly hope that doesn't happen. But a few months ago, I don't think we could have expected that we would be in such dire straits here in early August. But so I do have some concerns, but I also think it's probably way too early to panic about either college basketball or the Olympics, because we've got many months before those decisions have to be made.
Yeah, I'm in church every night on the college basketball season, but I think even if you're not a fan or don't follow college sports, it's a big deal for Indianapolis, because if you're not aware, the Final Four will be held here next April. So something
Yep.
that I think we all want to pay attention to. David, another question, you and I have talked a lot about this, but the future of sports journalism and print journalism, has changed so much during your career, and where do you see that going in future years?
Boy, it's very hard to be optimistic. I mean, so many jobs have been lost, and I know we journalists get a lot of criticism. People get mad at us all the time. Think we're biased, think we're this, think we're that. But local journalism is
just
very
Greg Doyle, by the way, not you.
But local journalism is very important, and gosh, I'm around journalists all the time, even though we're disconnected here during the pandemic, and the journalists I'm familiar with are just trying to report the news, and obviously some have a commentary role and do that. I wish every fact that's reported now weren't taken as a signal of bias or politicized or whatever. But that's kind of where we are right now. I recently read the Alexander Hamilton biography and was stunned to see how many things in the 1790s or the same headlines that we have in 2020. Politicization of a pandemic, a lot of divisiveness in the country, two sides of the political spectrum savaging each other. So I thought, well, this isn't actually anything new. In a way, it was sort of comforting to see that the country has been through rough and bumpy times previously and survived. So I hope that's the case. But yeah, I'm very concerned about the future of journalism, because it really sort of is the fourth estate, the other peg of what our democracy relies on. So I don't know what the solutions are, but I know I'm so appreciative of people who take the IndyStar print edition or subscribe online, and I'm kind of surprised how cheap it is, really. I myself, I probably should be subscribing to the Washington Post and New York Times digital editions, because it is very inexpensive, and we're just covering sports, which is largely entertainment, but for covering your local communities and for covering your government and your nation's things that are important to the nation. I mean, journalism, we've just seen, is just very essential. And if you don't think so, I also read a book recently about the Berlin Wall, and with the way things were in old East Germany, I guarantee you there's not a single American on the left or on the right who would have enjoyed living in the old East Germany with the government control of everything.
Okay, we're not throwing any softballs on the way out here. Do you think college athletes should be paid for participation If so, should scholarships be factored in to compensation? How would this affect sports outside of basketball and football?
I do not think college athletes should be paid, no.
Okay, that was cut and dry. And let's see, we got time for one or two more? I guess one last question I'll ask you. You mentioned the Doc Councilman Project. Are there any other bucket list books that are on your agenda?
Yeah, a few. I don't know if I would really like to collect an anthology of Butler basketball stories I've written since being on the beat since 2001. And obviously that's would be kind of easy because that would just be collecting, but I have to get IndyStar approval for that. So that's certainly something I'd like to do. And I also would like to write a biography of hurdler Ronaldo Nehemiah, who I consider the greatest hurdler of all time, and his shot at Olympic glory was waylaid by our 1980 boycott. But I think Nehemiah, and his biography has never been written either. I would really like to. I don't know whether I get to him. I'll be lucky if I can finish a Doc Councilman biography, but those. At this point, I only want to pursue projects that I think are worthy, and the ones I mentioned, I think are worthy of books being written about them.
Didn't Nehemiah play in the NFL as well?
Yeah, he also played 3 years for the San Francisco 49ers. So that I think he's a very compelling figure, and I think his biography would make for a very interesting story.
Well, David, I really want to thank you, and I'd ask our Kiwanians to give you a round of applause here. And before we let you go, and I'm going to ask Taylor to put this up again at the same time, how can we purchase your book?
I see Taylor put that up there. It's I think it's supposed to be available in local bookstores soon, but I'm sort of amazed how easy it is to get online. It's IU Press website. It's easy to find it there, but it's also on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million. It's on all those sites to get online. Of course, I'm old-fashioned. I like the old. I love going to bookstores and just buying the book there, and I'm sure they'll make their way there soon. There's both the hardcover and a softcover edition. The book is so recent, I actually haven't even held a hardcover edition in my hand yet. I just have the softcover edition. But you know, tell your friends, it would make a great Christmas gift, I guess, for your IU friends or family, or even really people who just like the Olympic Games. It so happens that it's Indiana University Olympians, but there's a universality of the stories there that I think anyone who's interested in the Olympics would find these stories compelling. I didn't even get into some of the IU soccer players. Obviously, that's a fantastic sport as well. IU has just been very fortunate to have such great coaches, in throughout their history, and I think that they're largely responsible for the high number of medals won by Hoosier athletes.
Well, again, we sure thank you, and again, I sincerely thank you for the influence your book had on me and coming to Butler, and really means a lot to me. In recognition of you speaking up to us today, we're going to be making a donation in your name to Big Brothers Big Sisters of Indianapolis.
Oh, wonderful!
And
my wife actually was participated in that in Illinois at one time as a big sister.
Outstanding. So we'll send you that certificate, and again, I hope the Kiwanians, you will be buying David's book. And next week, I'll remind you that August 13th, we've got Dr. Dan Miller with the Historical Society on the pandemic of 1918 to 1920. Certainly a relevant topic. And if you want to stick around for a minute or two, the Kiwanians following the conclusion here, you're welcome to socialize. But David, thanks again, and hope everybody has a great week.
Thanks so much for having me. And again, thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.